What are some unique date ideas? I once went on a first date that completely changed the way I think about going out. We didn't do dinner. We didn't grab drinks. There was no awkward, "So what do you do?" interrogation across a small table. She suggested we meet at a bookstore. At first, I thought it was cute, but maybe a little quiet for a first date. I imagined us standing around pretending to browse while trying to think of things to say. But her actual plan? That's where it got interesting. The idea was simple. We each pick 3 books we genuinely love and then try to sell them to the other person. Not summarize them. Not give a school presentation. Sell them. Convince the other person why they need to read it. We split up for about 15 minutes. I wandered through the aisles, suddenly weirdly nervous. It felt more personal than picking a restaurant. The books I chose weren't random bestsellers. They were pieces of me. One was a novel that got me through a rough year. One was a philosophy book that changed how I think about failure. The third was just something ridiculous and funny that made me laugh when I needed it most. When we met back up, we found 2 chairs in a quiet corner near the travel section. And that's when the real date started. She went first. And it wasn't about the plot. It was about why she loved the book. Why it made her cry. Why the main character frustrated her. What it said about ambition. What it said about loneliness. I learned more about her in 10 minutes than I usually learn in 2 months of small talk. Then it was my turn. I tried to be smooth. I wasn't. I got animated. I probably talked too fast. But instead of judging me, she leaned in, asked questions, challenged my opinions. We ended up debating one of my picks for 20 straight minutes. At one point, we both forgot we were in a bookstore and started laughing way too loudly. The best part? There were no dead silences. No pressure to impress through status or stories. Just curiosity. After we finished pitching our books, we picked one from each other's stack and bought them. It felt symbolic somehow, like trading pieces of perspective. We grabbed coffee afterward and kept referencing the books like inside jokes we had just created. In the long run, we didn't work out. Different life directions. Different timing. But that date stuck with me. Because it was interactive. It revealed values without forcing them. It showed how someone thinks, what moves them, what makes them light up. It skipped the resume and went straight to personality. Since then, I've reused the idea a few times. Sometimes it's books. Sometimes it's favorite songs in a record store. Once it was each of us building a starter kit for the other person in a thrift shop. Every time, the same result, real conversation. I realized something that night in that bookstore. Unique dates aren't about being extravagant. They're about creating a situation where 2 people get to show who they really are, instead of just answering questions across a table. And honestly, I'd take that over another loud restaurant any day. I've learned something over time. Planning a date shouldn't feel like rolling dice. A lot of guys overthink the perfect first spot, trendy new restaurant, viral rooftop bar, someplace you saw on Instagram. And then you show up and it's too loud to hear each other. Or the food sucks. Or the vibe is completely off. So I stopped doing that. Instead, I built a small rotation of places I know. I know the menu. I know the lighting. I know whether you can actually talk without shouting. That alone removes half the anxiety before the date even starts. If conversation stalls for a second, at least I'm not also worrying about whether the place was a mistake. Same with activities. I've heard people say, "Don't suggest karting or trivia, that's childish." But here's the thing. If I enjoy it, I'm not hiding that. Why would I try to audition as someone else? For example, there's this upscale but relaxed Italian spot near me that does trivia nights. Not chaotic sports bar energy, more wine glasses, dim lights, and competitive nerds quietly arguing over geography questions. I invite dates there all the time. The reaction tells me everything. Some girls wrinkle their nose and say, "Ugh, that's boring. Let's just go dancing." That's fine, but that's not me. Others light up and go, "That sounds fun. I love trivia." And suddenly we already have something to connect over before we even show up. I've also tried new hobbies, not usually first dates, but second or third when there's already some comfort. Recently, I booked a beginner's archery lesson. It sounded random, I know, but we ended up laughing the entire time. Neither of us could hit the target consistently. The instructor kept politely correcting our stance while we tried not to take it too seriously. And that's the point. When you do something active or slightly unfamiliar, you see how the other person handles it. Do they get competitive? Embarrassed? Playful? Withdrawn? Blame the equipment? Same with hiking. I'll suggest a busy, scenic trail, nothing extreme, just popular and safe. If someone lists hiking in their profile, this is where you find out if that's real or just something they wrote because everyone writes it. Are they actually excited to move? Or are they checking their phone the entire time? The biggest shift for me was this. I stopped trying to impress and started trying to filter. If I pick things I genuinely enjoy, trivia nights, classes, trails, casual competitive activities, then even if the chemistry isn't there, I still had a good night. I'm not pretending. I'm not performing. I'm in my element. And when someone fits into that naturally, it feels effortless. The right person won't roll their eyes at the things you love. They'll either be curious enough to try, or already halfway better at it than you. Either way, you learn something real. And that's way more valuable than another loud bar where you can't even hear your own thoughts. The best date I ever had didn't look impressive on paper. No reservations. No fancy outfits. No sunset picnic aesthetic. It started with a canceled plan. We were supposed to go to this trendy rooftop bar downtown. She texted me 2 hours before saying she'd had a brutal week at work and didn't feel like dressing up or yelling over music. Instead of rescheduling, I said, "Okay, what do you feel like doing?" She replied, "Honestly, I just want to walk." So we met near this old part of the city where there are brick streets, random bookstores, and cafes that close too early. It was early fall, not cold yet, but the air had that edge to it. We didn't have a route. We just started moving. At first I thought it might get awkward. No structured activity. No tables separating us. Just walking side by side. But something about moving while talking made it easier. Less interrogation style. More organic. We stopped at a tiny bakery that was about to close. Bought 2 cinnamon rolls and ate them sitting on the curb like teenagers. She told me about the worst presentation she'd ever given at work. I told her about the time I quit a job out of pure ego and had to crawl back 3 months later. No one was trying to impress. At some point we passed a used bookstore that had one of those everything must go signs in the window. We walked in just to look around. Ended up in the philosophy section arguing over whether people change fundamentally or just adapt. She pulled a random book off the shelf and said, "Okay, open to page 87. If there's a sentence that makes sense, it's fate." Page 87 had something about choosing the difficult path because it builds character. We both laughed because it sounded dramatic and ridiculous. But then she looked at me and said, "I'm trying to choose the difficult path more lately." That was the first time the conversation turned real. Not trauma dumping. Not performative vulnerability. Just real. We kept walking until we reached a small bridge over the river. The city lights were reflecting off the water. It wasn't cinematic. There were cars driving by and someone arguing loudly on the sidewalk behind us. But in that moment it felt strangely quiet. She leaned on the railing, looked at the water, and said, "I like that this doesn't feel like an interview." And that stuck with me. There was no big kiss scene. No dramatic spark. When I walked her back to her car, we hugged longer than necessary, and she said, "Let's do this again." No plan again. It didn't become some epic love story. We dated for a few months. Life went different directions. But that night changed how I see first dates. It taught me that sometimes the best ones aren't about creativity or adrenaline or showing off hobbies. Sometimes the most unique date is the one where nothing is staged. No script. No agenda. Just 2 people walking through a city at night, figuring out if they like each other in real time. That's still the standard I measure everything against. The best date of my life started with a mistake. I showed up an hour early. Not because I'm that responsible. I just misread the time. I was standing outside this small jazz bar, hands in my pockets, pretending I wasn't nervously checking my phone every 30 seconds. When she texted, "Parking, be there in 5, I realized my mistake. I'd been pacing the block for 50 minutes like a lost tourist. She walked up laughing before she even said hello. "You look like you've been waiting since 1998. I told her the truth. She laughed harder. It broke the tension instantly. Inside, the place was dim and small, not fancy, but intimate. The kind of spot where you can still hear each other talk without shouting. There was a live trio setting up in the corner, piano, upright bass, saxophone. We didn't sit across from each other. We sat side by side at the bar. That changed everything. There's something about not facing someone directly that makes you drop the performance. You're not studying their reactions every second. You're just there. At first it was simple stuff. Work. Music. How we both pretend we like hiking more than we actually do. Then the band started playing. The music wasn't background noise. It was immersive. Slow, moody, almost nostalgic. The kind that makes conversations softer without you realizing it. At one point the sax player closed his eyes and leaned into a solo, and she leaned closer to me and whispered, "I love when someone clearly loves what they're doing." I looked at her instead of the stage. And that was the moment. Not fireworks. Not dramatic tension. Just this quiet realization that I felt completely calm next to her. Halfway through the second set, the power flickered and went out. The entire bar went dark. A few people groaned. Someone laughed. The band stopped. And then, without microphones, without lights, the piano player just kept playing. Soft. Acoustic. Raw. The bartender lit candles along the bar. Phone flashlights came on. It felt accidental and perfect at the same time. She grabbed my hand without looking at me. No big move. No question. Just instinct. We stayed like that through the entire unplugged set. After, instead of calling it a night, we walked outside. The rain had started, not heavy, just enough to make the pavement shine under the streetlights. Neither of us had an umbrella. We didn't run. We just walked. Shoes getting wet. Jackets pulled tighter. Talking about childhood dreams we'd never told anyone else. She told me she once wanted to open a bakery and move somewhere quiet. I told her I secretly wanted a dog more than I wanted most material things. When we reached her car, I expected the polite hug. Instead, she looked at me, rain in her hair, and said, "This was better than perfect." I kissed her then. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was warm, slow, certain. We dated for a year after that. Life shifted us in different directions eventually. Careers, cities, timing. No betrayal. No explosion. Just reality. But whenever someone asks me about the best date of my life, I don't think about expensive dinners or wild adventures. I think about a power outage, candlelight, rain, and the first time someone reached for my hand without hesitation. That's still undefeated. The best date of my life started in a grocery store. Not romantic. Not planned. Not impressive. I ran into her between the frozen pizzas and the ice cream section. We had matched on an app a week earlier, messaged a bit, and loosely said, "Yeah, we should grab coffee sometime." That vague promise that usually dies quietly. I was holding a basket with protein bars and toothpaste. She was arguing with herself over which ice cream flavor to buy. We locked eyes. There's this split second when you both realize, oh. She smiled first. Okay, this is either fate or the universe trolling me. I laughed, probably too loud. Instead of pretending it wasn't weird, we leaned into it. I asked what she was choosing. She said, "Help me decide, and you're partially responsible for my future emotional state." We stood there for 15 minutes debating ice cream like it was a life decision. Then she said, "You know what? If we're both already here, do you want to just turn this into the coffee date?" I looked down at my grocery basket. "Do I look date ready?" She shrugged. "Neither do I." So we paid for our stuff, walked 2 blocks to a cafe, and just started. No preparation. No rehearsed stories. No pressure. I think that's why it was different. When you plan a date for days, you build it up. You want it to go well. You try to say the right things. You present the best edited version of yourself. This wasn't edited. At one point, she had grocery receipts sticking out of her jacket pocket. I had toothpaste in my tote bag. We laughed about how adult that felt. We talked for hours. About boring things. Real things. The fact that we both hate networking events. The random fear that one day we'll wake up and realize we picked the wrong career. Childhood stuff. What scares us about relationships? At some point, the cafe started stacking chairs. We didn't notice. The barista had to gently remind us they were closing. Outside, the sky was pink and orange. That soft sunset that feels unreal. She looked at me and said, "Do you ever meet someone and feel like you skipped the small talk?" That was exactly it. We didn't have that awkward stretch where you check your phone in the bathroom and think, do I escape or do I stay? We kept walking. We ended up on a random rooftop parking garage because it had the best view of the city lights. It wasn't romantic in the traditional way, just concrete and wind and headlights below. She pulled the ice cream out of her grocery bag. "Yes," she said, "this is happening." We sat on the hood of her car, sharing slightly melted cookie dough ice cream with 2 plastic spoons. No music, no grand gesture, just laughter echoing in an almost empty rooftop. At one point, I noticed how easy my body felt around her. No tension in my shoulders. No overthinking my words. No scanning for approval. I wasn't performing. I was just there. Later that night, when we said goodbye, there wasn't this big dramatic kiss. It was softer, a slow lean in, a small smile afterward. But I remember driving home and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Calm. Not adrenaline. Not obsession. Not butterflies that feel like anxiety. Just this quiet certainty that I wanted to see her again. We dated for 8 months. It didn't end in disaster. No betrayal. Just life pulling in different directions, different cities, timing that wasn't aligned. But that first date stays with me because it reminded me that the best connections don't need perfect lighting, fancy reservations, or elaborate plans. Sometimes they start in a grocery store aisle, between frozen pizzas and melting ice cream. And somehow that's enough. I almost canceled. That's how it started. It had been a long week. I was tired, slightly irritated at life, and honestly not in the mood to impress anyone. We had planned to meet at 7 p.m. at a small rooftop bar downtown. Nothing crazy, just drinks. At 6:12, I was still sitting on my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about sending that, "Hey, something came up," text. Instead, I forced myself up, threw on a clean shirt, and went. The elevator doors opened onto the rooftop, and the first thing I saw was her laughing at something the bartender said. Not posing, not looking around nervously, just fully present. She turned, spotted me, and smiled like she was genuinely glad I showed up. That alone caught me off guard. Most first dates feel like interviews. You both walk in with a resume in your head. You list hobbies, career goals, siblings, maybe a funny childhood story. You wait for approval. This didn't feel like that. We ordered drinks, and within 10 minutes, she was telling me about how she once quit a stable job because she woke up one day and realized she was living someone else's version of success. No drama, no self-pity, just honesty. There was something bold about it. At one point, I asked her what she was most afraid of. She didn't hesitate. Wasting years being comfortable instead of being brave. That sentence sat with me. Halfway through the night, a live band started playing downstairs. Not planned, just coincidence. The kind of cover band that plays old pop songs everyone secretly knows. She looked at me and said, "If I go down there and dance, are you judging me?" I said, "Probably." She laughed and grabbed my hand anyway. Next thing I know, we're in the middle of a crowd of strangers, slightly offbeat, singing along to songs we haven't heard in years. I don't even dance. I usually overthink it. Worry about how I look. That night, I didn't care. There's this moment in every great date where something shifts, where you stop trying to calculate your next line and just react. Mine was when she spun around, hair flying everywhere, totally unbothered by who was watching. Confidence without arrogance. Joy without performance. Later, we escaped the noise and walked through the city. It started drizzling. That light rain that doesn't ruin anything but makes the streets glow under the lights. She asked me something I'd never been asked on a first date. Who are you when nobody needs anything from you? I didn't have a polished answer. I actually had to think. We ended up sitting on the steps of a closed art gallery, shoes slightly wet, talking about pressure, about expectations, about how exhausting it is sometimes to always be the strong one. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not for what I do, not for what I provide, but for who I am when I'm not performing. We talked until almost 2 a.m. When we finally said goodbye, it wasn't dramatic. No over-the-top declarations. Just a long pause where neither of us rushed. I drove home soaked, tired, and wide awake at the same time. Here's the thing. We didn't end up together long-term. Life got complicated. Different goals. Timing again. But that date changed something in me. It reminded me that connection isn't about how perfect someone looks on paper. It's about how they make you feel when you're just standing in the rain, laughing in the middle of the city, realizing you haven't checked your phone once in 4 hours. I almost didn't go that night. If I had canceled, I would have missed the date that reset my standards for what amazing actually feels like.